the best way to predict the future is to create it. Peter Drucker. A very good afternoon to all present here. On behalf of Amity School of Engineering and Technology and the student fraternity, I, Srishti Gosai, and Rishit Thakur extend a warm welcome to you all. Today, we have gathered here for the international guest lecture on the fascinating topic of digital you, the virtual future of medicine.
It is an honor to have with us the distinguished speaker, Professor Dr. Peter Conway, who will deliver today's expert talk. I would like to take a moment to thank OHSL for 15 collaborations and in organizing this remarkable event and bringing such an eminent personality to share his insights with us. Digital you is not just a concept, it is the next frontier in medicine, where virtual avatars transform data into life saving insights, ushering in a new era of precision and personalized care.
The concept of digital you marks a groundbreaking shift in the future of medicine, where virtual replicas of individuals powered by advanced computational models and data analytics enable unprecedented levels of personalized healthcare. These digital avatars stimulate the complexities of human biology from cellular dynamics to whole body systems, allowing for real time monitoring, predictive diagnostics, and tailored treatment strategies. By integrating vast data sets with cutting edge technologies like AI and digital twin frameworks, Digital U represents a transformative approach to medicine, promising health, precision, and patient outcomes. It is a vision of the future where technology and humanity converge to redefine healthcare.
At Amity, we take pride in blending the vibrancy of contemporary practice with the richness of timeless traditions. As part of our cherished customs, we extend a heartfelt welcome to our distinguished guests by presenting them with a sacred Tulsi sapling. This meaningful gesture symbolizes not only our respect for the ancient values that guide us, but also our commitment to fostering enduring relationships. The Tulsi, referred for its spiritual and medicinal significance, represents purity, growth, and harmony. May I request Dr. Selvamurthy sir, Professor Dr. Manoj Kumar Pandey sir, and Professor Dr. Madhuri Kumari ma'am to kindly step forward to present our guest, Professor Dr. Peter Coveney, a sapling. Hmm?
With great honor and privilege, we extend a heartfelt welcome to Professor Dr. Manoj Kumar Pandey, sir, the esteemed director of Amity School of Engineering and Technology. Sir, may we please have you deluge the welcome address for this prestigious international lecture?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all. Good afternoon. Can we again loudly say I can understand now after a long day, you must be tired. Good afternoon. Thank you. Let's once again welcome our guest today, Mr. Peter Coveney, with a huge round of applause, please, because he has with us from uh, UCL London, and he is here to discuss his expertise, his experiences among us. First of all, on behalf of our Honorable Founder President, sir, our Chancellor, our Vice Chancellor, Madam, on behalf of the whole MIT family, would like to welcome you to MIT University, Uttar Pradesh. And this topic is going to be very, very interesting because it's a multidisciplinary and transdisciplinary subject. And being a university, we have the expertise in offering all the courses, all the programs that are interdisciplinary in nature. So, where in one side we are talking about the digital you and how the digital and medicine and other application based things are important for the betterment of the life, so that uh, how it is can be implemented to all other sectors of the areas of the enterprise. So that Dr. Peter is going to highlight on, and especially in the field of the medicine. And we had felt that, rather, the whole world has felt that during the pandemic, when we all were helpless to provide the medicinal facility or any other type of facility to the human being. So definitely that has made us to work towards the towards area and how we are proceeding towards, and we are talking about the digital twin now, and how digital twin is going to disrupt the market, disrupt the industry, is again days to come will realize. And now we are talking beyond that. We are talking about the quantum computing. We are talking about many more such type of technologies which are really disrupting the way we are working and way we are living. So this I believe that, and I'm sure that this topic and this lecture is going to be really very interesting. And he has brought a lot of uh, real time experiences for you. And my suggestion to you will be to just take advantage of his experiences, his knowledge, and his expertise. With this, once again, we welcome you all to MIT University of Uttar Pradesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your insightful words of wisdom. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Konika Ray, Madam, a visionary scientist and a dedicated advocate for social welfare. With a PhD in virology and immunology from AIMS, New Delhi, Ma'am has made remarkable contributions to the field like antibody engineering, immunotherapy, and India's response to avian influenza, earning her labs the prestigious WHO Regional Reference Laboratory status. A recipient of the Young Scientist Award, she now leads biomedical research at OHSL, fostering collaboration, mentorship, and innovation. We are truly honored to have her here today to set the context for our event and introduce our esteemed guest. Please, ma'am.
Thank you. And I think that was an excellent introduction to the subject by the students. And I wish to first thank Dr. Madhuri Kumari and Dr. Manoj Pandey for organizing this talk today. I think both of us, all of us felt that we should not lose this opportunity of Dr. Peter Coveney being here in Delhi, considering our what we have been doing over the past year with Amity. You know that OHSL and Amity have been having at least 2 or 3 years of collaboration with students. But the last year has been quite intensive, and one group of students actually worked with digital twins. And it was quite a challenge because we were from the biomedical sciences and the students were from computational sciences, and it was a challenge for them to understand and to relate what projects we were explaining to them and what they came up with, the models. And it was a very good effort from the side of the students. So we hope this continues. And as you know, there is also a course on digital twins that has been started in Amity. So I don't want to stand too much in the way of Dr. Kovani's talk. So I will just give a quick introduction to Dr. Kovani, and also very thankful to Dr. Kovani for accepting this at such a short notice. So within 2 or 3 days, 2, 3 days ago, we'd asked him whether he would give a talk, and he's given this, and he's agreed to do so in a very busy schedule. The other thing is that he came to India through the British Council. He was hosted by British Council for the great talks by experts. And that also opens up the world of science in the UK, the kind of relationships that can be built up in research and collaborations. And so you must also make the most of his being here and ask your questions and anything that you may have on your mind. So a quick introduction to Dr. Kovani. Uh, Professor Peter Coveney at the University College of London holds a chair in physical chemistry, is director of the Center for Computational Science, is an associate director in the Center of Advanced Research Computing, and is an honorary professor in computer science. He is a professor in applied high performance computing at the University of Amsterdam and professor adjunct at Yale University School of Medicine. Dr. Kovani is active in a broad area of interdisciplinary research, including condensed matter physics and chemistry, material science, as well as life and medical sciences, in all of which high performance computing plays a major role. He has led many large scale projects including the EU FP7 Virtual Physiological Human Network of Excellence. He has been a recipient of many US, NSF, and DOE, as well as European supercomputing awards, which provide access to several petascale computers. Dr. Coveney chaired the UK Collaborative Computational Project Steering Panel from 2005 to 2015. He has published more than 500 scientific papers and co-authored 2 best-selling books, The Arrow of Time and Frontiers of Complexity, both with Roger Highfield. And now, of course, he has also written with Roger Highfield, Virtual You. And you must get a copy of this book. It is a fascinating book. I have read it. How building your digital twin will revolutionize medicine and change your life. So he's also the lead author of the first textbook on computational biomedicine. Dr. Coveney is founding member of the UK government's E-Infrastructure Leadership Council and a Medical Academy nominated expert to the UK Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology on Data, Algorithms and Modeling, which has led to the creation of the London-based Turing Institute. So these few words, he has much more to him, which I'm not reading out. I'll give the floor to Dr. Coveney. So we'll start by showing you a film that will give you an introduction to what the virtual human is all about. And then Dr. Coveney will give his talk.
जूम है कि जूम क्या है
So, dear students, as we get set for the video, which will actually give you an introduction to the concept of what Professor Coveney is going to talk about. It's an interesting video, but then in the meantime, I would also request you all to just Google around. It's so very easy. You say digital you, and the first thing that you see would be Professor Coveney's book, Digital You, or Virtual You. So it's all about the digital twin and you and the medicine, how is this working? So we'll start off with the video first.
Over the past
दूसरा this one. Yes. So this is the video on virtual human.
Our bodies are exquisitely complex machines. In our efforts to care and improve them, we look to those who push the limits of what is humanly possible, such as athletes. Now, you would say, what can we learn from them if every athlete is different? If they achieve peak performance through customized diets, training, and technology. As it turns out, we too are all different. That is to say, there is no single lifestyle, no diet, no medication that will work equally well for all of us. If this is so, how can we get the best out of our bodies? Imagine a virtual human, not made of flesh and bone, one made of bits and bytes. And not just any human, but a virtual version of you, accurate at every scale, from the way your heart beats down to the letters of your DNA code. You know that many drugs only work well on some people and can cause serious side effects in others. The reason is variations in DNA, our genetic differences. But we understand how these DNA differences change the building blocks of your body, the proteins, and we can simulate in a computer how drugs interact with them. By testing drugs on your virtual body, your doctor may eventually be able to test a wide range of drugs and select precisely the right one to suit you. But sometimes, choosing the right drug is not enough. We must also be able to deliver it to a precise target in the body. Take inhaled drugs, for instance, which can end up in the walls of your nose or at the bottom of your lungs, depending on the intricacies of your particular respiratory system. Using supercomputer simulations based on scans of your lungs, we can predict with high precision where particles will flow, and then design devices that can deposit drugs exactly where your body needs them. Well, obviously, mastering drug delivery means controlling the body's main transport network, your circulatory system. By simulating the movement of red blood cells and other cells, we can understand important protective processes, like those that prevent blood loss after an injury. Virtual humans could help doctors to plan risky surgery too. They could be used to work out how to reach an aneurysm deep in the brain that is at risk of rupture, which could cause a stroke. Surgeons could then try out the best They could even double-check that the implant will not cause problems, such as clotting, before they try it out on you. Physics, chemistry, and biology intertwine in your circulatory system to drive the most remarkable pump that evolution has ever created, the heart. To create a virtual heart, processes have to be modeled at multiple scales, from the contraction of muscle to the blood flowing through its chambers to the movement of charged atoms during a contraction. Virtual hearts already beat within supercomputers, where we can test the effect of different drugs or pacemakers, but also more fundamentally, to understand the way an individual's heart works. Your virtual avatar will not only be built in your image, it will also move like you. We can use it to calculate the forces and the mechanical stresses that are constantly induced on your bones, and predict the risk you will suffer a fracture. Doctors can also use virtual humans to work out how diet, exercise, or drugs can help those with brittle bones. And what if we go even further than treating disease, using virtual humans to prevent illness? Within a supercomputer, many virtual versions of you can explore small changes in your lifestyle and how they affect your health, aging, and quality of life. Virtual humans, helping you to figure out the very best that you can be.
I start? Are you ready? Are we ready? Leave it, fine. Do you have a slide advancing? A pointer or a slide advance? Thank you very much indeed for this welcome, and indeed to the University of Professor Pandey and others for hosting my visit here. I want to take you on a journey through the outer reaches of what's possible using the most sophisticated, most powerful supercomputers on the planet, because that's what we work with, in order to be able to model humans at the scales we were looking at there, which is the whole gamut from the molecule and the genome to the whole human. It doesn't stop there, as you'll see in my talk. We're interested in populations of humans, that's many of them, for a range of purposes. So it's going to be a rush through all of this wacky science, and I want to start as quickly as I can. That's a slide of acknowledgements. People put them often at the end. I prefer to put them at the beginning to make sure I don't forget or run out of time. It lists all the agencies that provided funding and support to us and access to the resources I'm going to describe. The names there of collaborators, it doesn't do justice to the scale of the endeavor, but the ones that could be fitted in and still readable. So it's international, that's the main message. Mainly the collaborations so far we've been involved in are ones across Europe and with the US. I'm here, as Konika pointed out, with funding from the British Council and others in India to promote this whole area, which I think India is poised potentially to make an interesting and important contribution to. Here's a nod in the direction of the supercomputers, because I'm not going to speak about them very explicitly during this talk, but you have to remember that just about everything I'm discussing actually runs on those machines. The ones at the bottom, right-hand side, there are two of them named, Frontier and Aurora, which are in the top 3 of the top 500 supercomputers on the planet Earth. They're both in the USA, they're part of the Department of Energy, and they are open access to people who can win competitive proposals to get onto them, which is what we do. So here is what I want to talk about, covering a range of issues around virtual you, digital twins, and where this whole area is going. So what are digital twins will be the first part of this, and then rapidly it develops into the idea that in order to do this at all seriously, you have to use prediction, which may sound terribly futuristic in biology and medicine, and that's part of the challenge. It's the notion that we can predict things before they happen and take advantage of that insight to act in ways that can be medically and biologically beneficial. So that's a bit of a new idea in medicine anyway. So then I'll talk about how you try to build these virtual humans, the kind you saw in that video. It's actually an IMAX film, which will project at ultra high resolution on enormous screens, maybe 2 or 3 times the size of the one we have here, which is pretty good itself. It's a very nice screen. So then we'll talk a bit about examples of digital twins in components of the human body and drugs. And I want to discuss artificial intelligence and its role in all of this. So let's go to talk about what digital twins are and the vision that's beneficial about them. And the best way to kind of motivate this is to think about how medicine works today, maybe in all its kinds. I don't regard it as necessarily particularly scientific. One can debate how scientific medicine is, because at the root of science, there's this concept of reproducibility and objectivity, which sometimes medicine doesn't appear to show. But when medicine is in its normal mode of action, it's usually about some doctor or physician looking at you as the patient and trying to decide how to treat you. And they do that on the basis of experience and having encountered many cases that they think are looking like you from the past, and they have access to literature on clinical trials, so it's all past history, and they use that to try and say, well, you're going to fit in with this and I think that's how we'll treat you. Briefly here, as the slide indicates, artificial intelligence, which is having quite a significant impact, and often in the newspapers and media front page style, saying AI is that now going to solve the problem of cancer or some other disease, is actually working. Artificial intelligence is working exactly like this methodology I described that doctors invoke today without using that method, and that is that it gathers lots of examples of previous patients in particular situations, sufficiently large data set, it hopes, so that when your data is fed in, it will then infer what your problem is or what the treatment should be. Put in that way, I think it's clear that we can agree that isn't personalized medicine. What it's doing is predicting your state of health or how to treat you on the basis of other people's data. So there's room for doing things a lot better than that, since other people's data, and the film again underscored this, is not reliably predictive of you yourself. So the picture here is the analog that I have with making medical predictions and driving along the road where you should be looking ahead to see where you're going, but in fact you spend all your time looking in the rear mirror, as if the rear mirror is going to tell you what you need to do for an action. This is what we're challenged with, and the reason why digital twins are a way of transcending this, in one sense, is simply because they use the scientific method in its full glory, and the other is indeed that it's highly personalized to the individual. And I want to illustrate this initially by giving an example of another domain where digital twins are having some significant success and evolving, and it's a complicated one, and it's the one about the planet Earth, our planet. And why is that interesting? It's another one which has immense societal importance. It's related to predicting where the planet is heading in climate terms. This is an extension of weather forecasting, which is also going to crop up, because everyone, maybe I'm exaggerating, most people want to know tomorrow's weather, not to wait to find out what it is, because it's advantageous to know in advance. And meteorological centers the world over make predictions of tomorrow's weather today because they have powerful supercomputers and they run sufficient numbers of versions, as it were, of the model that they can make a reliable prediction. So in the case of climate, we're not talking about predicting tomorrow, of course. We're talking about predicting what may be the state of the Earth in 10 years, in 20, 50, 100 or more. And maybe what's the surface temperature of the Earth going to be if it continues in the way it is now at the end of this century, would be an example of a question that's important to people for fairly obvious reasons. Typically, we're interested in mitigating that, which means stopping it going into states of increasingly high temperatures because of the consequences that we can see. Sea levels rising, low-lying land, islands being submerged, people's existence and livelihood threatened. So if we can build models of this before it happens, we're able to take actions to prevent it. So these slides are really examples from the European Centre for Short and Medium Weather Forecasting, and they just illustrate what's happening by analogy. You have to think with the medical case. Gather observations on what's going on the planet Earth with these methodologies that collect data like satellites, drones, and so on, and feed it into the digital model. Those are the two twins. On the left, it's the real world. And on the right-hand side, you've got the digital representation, which you can then run forward to see where it may go in prediction terms, or you can look back to see where it's come from. And you can play with this kind of model and indicate decisions that should be taken. This is supposed to be available to all people, all of the public, indeed, that they can investigate what's going on. And I want to go to the next slide for you just to remind you of one of the problems in weather and climate prediction, which is afflicting our ability to predict things in medicine as well. And that's to do with uncertainty in the models. We have to be able to quantify the uncertainty. We can't just say, oh, this model is not 100% accurate, therefore I'm not going to pay attention to it. That will never happen in reality. But that there are elements of a model that contain uncertainties, and we need to know how those uncertainties propagate from the input data to the final ones. And in a case like weather and climate, the problem is substantial because of a phenomenon known as turbulence in fluid dynamics. And turbulence is a form of chaos, and chaos is a concept in classical physics that emerged really towards the tail end of the last century. And that tells you that the slightest variation in your knowledge of initial conditions to start a simulation off for a prediction can lead to scenarios which diverge exponentially from one another. So you get a cloud of probable outcomes. This picture is showing you a number of virtual outcomes that might arise in the simulations, and you aggregate those and you build a probability distribution. And that has the consequence that I think we're all familiar with. If you hear a weather forecast, you're interested in it for the next 2 or 3 days, you will probably already realize that within a week or so, that prediction is totally unreliable, so you don't pay much attention to it. You have to continuously update and run these simulations because they're reliable at short scales. But what is the benefit of being able to do this? Dramatic and where lives are at risk and can be saved. This is just a movie compiled by the National Weather Forecast Service in the USA, but they're having to deal with it all the time, an increasing frequency of this. That is when they know that a hurricane or some sort of tornado or something like that has developed at a location here way offshore. It goes into the Gulf of Mexico there and then hits land. Where is it going to hit land? What's it going to do when it does? And we know these things can be devastating. They can kill people. So if you know what's going to happen ahead of time, you will move them out of the way and you will do what you can to protect property. So this is an immensely beneficial thing. And that's what we're aiming to try to achieve in the medical domain. We're substantially behind this, but the program that I'm talking about, we're all talking about, is can we make predictions ahead of time like this that can help people in treatments or to avoid things going wrong with them? And this is just a snapshot of a figure that has a lot of information in it. I don't want to dwell on the details here. I'm just talking over it. But it's an example of the rare case where in a medical scenario, medics and clinicians and others actually really care about a model prediction. It's COVID-19 in the UK in 2020, around March of that year. The Prime Minister at the time, whose name was Boris Johnson, wasn't very keen on taking COVID seriously, didn't want to take the country into lockdown, but people were generating models that you could use to assess how many people are going to die per day after the initiation of the infection. And that's really what this plot is showing. And one of the things, if you can see it down at the bottom there, is a yellow orangey dotted line. And that's the predictions of a colleague called Neil Ferguson at Imperial College. He ran one simulation of a model he developed quickly. He converted an influenza model into a pandemic model for COVID-19 and sought to use it to predict what was going to happen. The vertical axis is, gruesome. It's the cumulative deaths, and then it's a function of days. And if you look closely, you'll see the number of deaths that he was forecasting in scenarios with his model were, in the area of 10,000 or more, and that was enough to make Boris Johnson decide it was serious and he had to go into lockdown, because these models have, beside the transmission mechanisms involved, and they're population models, so each human is described actually as an agent here. Between two agents, the COVID can be transferred, and you have a model of non-pharmaceutical interventions. That means, how can I suppress the spread of the disease by using things like social distancing, closing schools, pubs, dealing with intensive care units effectively in hospitals and so on. They're all parameterized in the model. What this slide is actually showing you, though, is there's a great deal of uncertainty in those models. You have to quantify the uncertainty if you're going to make predictions that are reliable and understandable. These kind of shades of purple, blue there are showing the probability of seeing much higher numbers of deaths than the ones he reported. His were at the low end. So this model is not only capable of showing, the order of 10,000 deaths after 200 days, but it can accommodate up to maybe 50 or 60,000 as well. So this is very serious. If you don't know the distribution of outcomes from the model, you can't make informed decisions. The distribution itself is shown on that vertical axis on the right-hand side, and it's anything but a normal distribution. It's what we call a fat-tailed distribution because there's a lot of probability at the one side of the peak in the curve and very little in the other. These types of probability distributions are well known in climate modeling, and they're very important because they tell you, in fact, that the probability of these supposedly low probability events are higher than you'd think. If you understand probability theory, you have to calculate the first moment of that or an expectation value. And that value is substantially shifted from the maximum in the peak to higher values. So you need to know that. You can then, if you use uncertainty quantification, you can get detailed information about which mechanisms in the model are the source of most of the uncertainty and need to be quantified accurately. This presentation isn't one that's suitable for going into the details, so I'll just skim over the next slide, but that's what it shows. A whole range of the most important parameters in the model. Actually, there are over 900 in Ferguson's model, but it whittles down to about 20 that matter most. And among those 20, the top 3 of them are the ones that you really need to control. But suddenly you've got some idea of which of these parameters in the model need to be changed if you're going to suppress the disease. And the disease is something that causes death. So you're in a position where you can start making predictions that will save people's lives. Without this model and this way of analyzing it, you couldn't do anything. You'd just simply be watching and observing. How do I take the description from an epidemiological model, which means a population-based one with transmission across the population down to the individual? And you might say, well, what type of data do I need? We saw in the video some idea of this. It's overwhelming if you list all the numerical details about the number of genes that are involved, the number of proteins, numbers of cells, and indeed microorganisms involved, for example, in the microbiome and other things. If you just decided I've got to get all of that to do anything, you would be going in the wrong direction, because medicine, like most areas of science, can be simplified into, if you like, hierarchical structures which determine most of what's of concern. So you don't throw everything in and stir it and hope for the best. The type of data you need is discussed in this slide. And I really just want to remind you of the sort of information you need. We saw it in the slide, in the video. It includes molecular level data, genomic, proteomic, metabolomic, and so on. These omics matter. There are cell models, and imaging is a really central area for the larger scale ones. So these are all the kinds of data you need in order to start building models. So let's have a look at one type of example of this. This is like at the level of the virtual human. We were seeing towards the end of the virtual humans video, they're whole human models, so they're quite graphically compelling. And how do we build models from those? We take anatomical data on humans and we analyze it in the way we wish to, for example, using MRI or CT scans and extracting the structures we're interested in. It could be the neuromuscular skeletal system in the body. It could be organ systems, or it could be the vasculature, which is the arteries and veins. And that's one of the things I personally have been spending quite a bit of time working on. So you end up in the situation which is now in the state of the art globally, where you have models of various kinds of organ systems. The key one we'll dwell on most here is the heart, the one sort of in the upper central portion there. And my own work involves the whole human vasculature I mentioned earlier, which is on the right. But the heart is the single organ system that is by far the most advanced in terms of our modeling and simulation of it. You can personalize it because you get images of an individual. That's what I'm talking about all the time. You take the individual's images from the heart and you bring those into the simulation environment. You have many things going on which are multi-scale. The video showed you some of that stuff. And typically you have things like pacemaker cells at the cellular level, which drive ultimately the beating of the human heart in a periodic way. They engender in a coherent way the electrophysiological response of all the other cells in the heart, such that you get a beating wave, essentially electrophysiological wave that drives mechanical contractions and relaxations. So all of that has to be in the model. And in addition to that, we have fluid dynamics because we're actually pushing blood in and out of the model. So this particular model, which is developed by colleagues of mine in Barcelona Supercomputing Center, has all of those components in it and it will run on a major supercomputing system. And it's personalized because you use the data on an individual patient to develop that. Now, for those people who are interested in the technical end of modeling and simulation and computing, I don't have time to go into this particularly. I mentioned the bleeding edge, fastest and biggest supercomputers in the world. We run our software on those. If you're going to do a whole human blood flow, you have to have the power of one of those exascale machines. It means 10 to the power 18 floating point operations a second, and it's packed with about I'd say around of the order of 80,000 GPUs of graphical processing units that are adding to the acceleration of the simulations. So you can get a personalized model and run blood flow through it. And these are the sort of things we do. Let me just mention, without the technical detail here, the kind of problems you can start to address. Remember all the time, yes, there's a supercomputer involved, but it's also taking personal data from patients and running those. Here, the one that's probably worth dwelling on most of a snippet of a few examples of modeling and simulation with the code, it's called HemLB for blood flow, is what causes stroke in humans. It's one of the most damaging of these kind of blood flow related pathologies. And the circle of Willis is a kind of structure at the bottom of the brain, which passes blood into the brain around the arteries and veins there. And when that goes wrong in some way, some anomalies develop or are present, they can lead to stroke. So what we're trying to do here is to take images of patients, study their blood flow dynamics ahead of being able to determine how to treat them. Each patient with a circle of Willis has their own circle of Willis, in the sense that there is no really meaningful sense of an average here. Everyone is different and substantially different. So if you want to predict someone's likelihood of stroke or how to avert it, you cannot use an average model. You cannot use other people's data. You have to use the patient's data that's in front of you. And this is the message of digital twins. Don't give me someone else's patient data or the whole population's data. It may not be relevant. Remember, averages are misleading. They may make you feel good that we're somehow, if I'm near the average and I think I'm near the average, I'm going to be treated well. But even that's a mistake. This case is an illustration. Another example I like to give is in the prehistoric era, people are often misled by the idea that the average height of the humans that were running around then might have been around in sort of British measurement units, 3'6", say. And that might give you the impression that we had a whole bunch of pygmies running around a place like Stonehenge, and they would be vulnerable to attack by looming eagles and hawks and kites of the sort you see here because they were so small. But that's completely erroneous, because what's really going on in the height distribution is most people who manage to live to the order of 50 or so had heights that are not that much different from our own. It was the problem that many children failed to grow and survive beyond a few years old, and so their average height would be much smaller. But if you didn't realize that, you would come out with this idea that they were pygmies running around. You see the problem with even an average. So let's talk about the heart, after talking about blood flow there. And the heart's been developed, I mentioned it a few minutes ago, in a way that's more sophisticated than any other organ to date. And you can look at it in a personalized way, a single heart, and develop things based on that knowledge for a patient. This is what medical device companies tend to do now with pacemakers of their own that they may need to put in someone's heart. They can make a pacemaker personalized by matching it to the simulation properties of that person's heart. And that's a story that can be developed individually. In this talk, I'm not going to dwell on the individual because I actually want to push you into the space of many in a population rather than the individual. And that's what the slide that I've just put up is about. What happens if you consider not just one, but many hearts? What benefit does that give you when every heart in the study, you're simulating them, is different? Maybe it's going to be personalized. So here we're touching on interesting things. I'm moving at quite high speed here. So I want to first remind you of what the development of virtual humans has done on the individual scale. We know now, but by experimental methodologies, that it's much more effective to develop drugs against human data and the simulations that you can run on those than the conventional route in medicine and pharmaceutical drug development, which is to test animal models. In the computational area I inhabit, a model is always some abstract entity, maybe mathematically represented, and in a computer you can simulate it. But in the biological context, the medicine, a model is typically an animal, a real animal, and you ingest the drug that you're developing in it, and you see how it reacts. Well, again, if we were saying an individual is different from the group, now an animal is vastly different from other humans. So is it surprising that we can't rely on those models to predict how humans would behave? And because we're able to now make better predictions, we're eradicating gradually the need for animal testing. And that itself is, I would suggest, a very good thing. But I want to really go even beyond that now and take you with me on the idea that we're now only looking at humans, but now we want to run virtual trials, in silico trials, not on the humans who have to ingest the medicine, but on their avatars or virtual digital twins. Here's how you do it. And this is an example from colleagues from Barcelona. They've actually got an interesting startup company now going called Elem Biotech. And it is able to look at the impact of drugs and inhibitors maybe being developed or being conjectured to cure individuals now on a personalized basis. So imagine this situation, and this is what they've been able to do, is to create a population of hearts. There can be tens of them in these virtual trial scenarios. They're all different. They have different damage to them in some cases and scar tissue and so on. No two of those hearts are the same, but they represent individuals with the different parameters. They're beating away, and some of them, may have slight arrhythmias compared with normal behavior. But the point that I want to make is the following. Suppose you want to do clinical trials of some sort on these patients and their hearts because you're concerned about the impact of the drug. This is a real example that goes back to the last time Donald Trump was president of the USA, which was to the sort of around the time that COVID was beginning to take off. And he had his own opinions about how we should treat patients with COVID. I don't know if you remember 4 or whatever 5 years ago it was, but he was suggesting a number of remedies, and this is about one of them. Later on, he suggested that we would all be better off if we swallowed bleach, if you remember that. But here it was he thought that using anti-malarial tablets, in particular hydroxychloroquine and other things, would protect you from COVID. So here's a virtual test of that hypothesis, so to speak, and you will see that there were sufficient numbers of people who took Donald Trump seriously that they actually went into clinical trials and found out for themselves what the impact of levels of hydroxychloroquine was. So I'm putting this point to you now already. It should be obvious. Would you rather actually take that clinical trial, or would you prefer to have an in silico trial with your virtual heart? Let's just see the kind of things that go on. So you can dose up the patients in these simulations with different levels of the drug that you're interested in, and you measure the ion currents and the consequences on the arrhythmias, both in resting conditions and under stress. And one thing I didn't mention before, but is important here, is that still today, most clinical trials and the data that are used for basing medical treatments on are white males, Caucasian males. Surprisingly, there are very few women in these trials anyway in that category. But if you start developing virtual trials, you can have individuals of any shape or form you wish to use and represent in the model. And that's what's happening here. We have male and female. They exhibit characteristically different pathologies under these arrhythmias. This table is too complicated to worry about in detail, but you can see what's happening in terms of dosing people with hydroxychloroquine at different concentrations or quantities and combinations with other inhibitors. And then you've got three columns. The first from the right is from the left, I think, is the virtual population of 64 human hearts. And then we've got clinical data from trials where 90 people were involved and then with 200. And you can just see superficially from the studies that the comparison between what percentage is found to have problems with this drug treatment regime are qualitatively rather similar, and the simulations are meant to be representative of the typical human population. So broadly speaking, you get similar outcomes, but you get a lot more detail on what's going on because you can study each heart and what it displays in great detail. So you're looking at individual response to the drug, and this is a case with a female heart, which is characteristically, male hearts are usually bigger than female ones, and they have different structural details in them. And under this type of arrhythmia, women develop something called a left bundle branch block, and I'm simply showing an example of that as a consequence of the treatment here. You get different pathologies and arrhythmias in the male subset. So this is one of the things you can do. You're looking at a clinical trial, but you're not actually inflicting any injury or pain on the people who are getting involved. One thing that you can do as you go towards a virtual human, of course, is to start linking the individual organs together. This slide just is a really superficial nod in that direction. We now have high quality models of the human heart and also of the vasculature that I mentioned earlier. We can put those things together as components in a software system, and we end up with a cardiovascular system, which is a closed system with the blood circulating around it and driven by the heart. And then if you start imagining where this is going in the longer term, it should be sort of clear that we're able to bolt on other organ systems. Beyond that, it could be the lungs. There are groups globally who develop lung models. The lungs take the oxygen in, they get the oxygen into the blood flow then goes round, and it could visit other organ systems that it will tag on. So this is a way of building that up. And in each case, the thing is highly individualized. That was macroscopic organ level scenarios where people are doing real world, maybe surgical interventions and other therapies, as well as treatments for drugs, which you can use these simulations for. Now I'm going down to the molecular level because I want to talk about drugs, their development, and how they're used to treat individuals. This slide is about the scenario with drugs as they stand today versus the extent to which they could be made personalized. The pharmaceutical industry today is still doing things which are very, very simple. And that is, they want a blockbuster, a one-size-fits-all model, which has, impact. One drug has cures, as it were, many people. But the reality is different when you have personalized drug therapies as well. You imagine infectious diseases, can be HIV or TB and other things, the pathogens like bacteria and viruses, they tend to develop resistance to drugs when you treat them with it, because they're performing a sort of version of Darwinian evolution, and they can mutate while preserving the function of the proteins that are coded by the RNA typically that is in the virus, while developing resistance to the drug you're giving the patient. So the patients all have different sequences typically, and then they have mutations that are caused by the drug treatment. And you need to keep track of that. So you have to do genome sequencing here, with the difference that you're really sequencing the pathogen that's been integrated into the DNA of the human, not the whole genome. So you would like to have that as it's patient specific, but the drug companies are just telling you, I'm going to make one drug and you use that. Well, what's the reason for that? It's convenient for them. It's one drug, $10 million, 10 years, and about $2 or $3 billion to make such a drug. And it fails 96% of the time you start a project. That means there's a huge amount of scope for improvement. And in that picture, if I'm successful 4% of the time, I hope that I will have a drug that works for everyone. Do you? If you're lucky, your so-called blockbuster may apply to around 50% of the population. It may be ineffective for most of them. It's just saying that we can do a whole lot better. And drugs are specific to patients, not working all over the population. How do we do better with that? We have to develop computational methods to do the evaluations, not do experiments, make lots of drug candidates, wait a long time for that to happen, then test all of these things experimentally, which is laborious. If a product looks promising, you take them into clinical trials, and the clinical trials go for 3 phases, and quite often they fail right at the end, and that costs you a fortune. So what about trying to put most of that into a computer and produce a virtual version that may be applicable to one or many, a stratified group of the population? We can do that today in an interesting fashion by combining elements of artificial intelligence with models that we call computational chemistry style. We can look at how a drug interacts with a protein in the active site very specifically, and we can actually generate a virtuous circle where the molecular detailed simulations are fed into a generative type of artificial intelligence that's able to create new molecules that are better than the ones that you started with, entirely different structures and diverse structures as well, which is important to maintain a good population of candidates, not put all your money onto one. So this combination is the sort of thing we're interested in working on. This is a complicated slide that, again, I'm not interested in the detail of it. It's showing on the right-hand side the main message in a collaboration with AstraZeneca, an Anglo-Swedish pharmaceutical company. They've developed a generative active learning methodology, which in combination with our molecular simulations can find structurally new, different, and more powerful binding agents than the ones you started from. And that's a critical component to try and develop many, many more drugs in the future. That's a way forward there. I spoke earlier about the importance of making predictions that are reliable and reproducible. And I want to dwell on that for a few moments here, because remember, if you're going to make in silico medical procedures, they're going to have to be approved by regulatory authorities. And the one that's most advanced in this sense is the American one called the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. They've already got in place regulations and procedures that any in silico method you produce or propose has to comply with. Because what we're trying to do is produce methods that are scientific. That means they're objective. It's not because I say something works that we believe it. It's because everyone agrees that it's the correct procedure. And that's what's important about science. It's objective. It's not dependent on the individual. So you have to worry about your verification and validation for the simulations and this notion of uncertainty quantification that I mentioned earlier to you. In weather forecasting, one of the most advanced areas for applying this for obvious reasons, climate prediction, it's coming now in a big way into the context of medical digital twins. This is a high-level talk, so I do not want to dwell on the details, but we have been involved heavily in developing software that does this. It's all open source stuff, and you can apply it to any model of simulation you developed, including the ones we've looked at here. This is open source material, so you can take bits and pieces of the code to evaluate it to make sure it's validated or verified. Verification means that your model actually is implemented correctly in the computer code, and the uncertainty quantification is about how sensitive your model is to the parameters in the model when they have some degree of uncertainty in themselves. So let's then just go back to artificial intelligence here. Where does that play a role? Because we're often told AI is the solution to just about any technical problem that anyone could imagine. I'm reminding you how artificial intelligence works. I described it at the beginning. Many examples, you train a system, machine learning system against them. It's looking for correlations, input data versus output data. Which things do you want to correlate? So you can do that in many cases, and it seems to work, but it does depend heavily on how you classify the AI system itself. And oftentimes that's actually an arbitrary thing done by the people who set up the whole structure. And in the case of medical applications, I said already, and it's on this slide, you use data from many previous examples and then hope it will work for a new case. And for a person in a population, that means you're using other people's data to predict for the person in front of you. And my main point here is that isn't a personalized medicine. What we're looking for is the digital twin version of this, because what it does is it takes your data, overwhelmingly your data, and it makes predictions based on that. And that's both better to do scientifically rather than relying on statistics, but it's also, as it were, a massive improvement in democratizing people's access to a healthcare system, because it means every person who comes into a digital twin situation is being treated on the same footing. We're not building medical systems that reflect a population or a particular part of the population and then are used for other parts that it's unrepresentative of. So you have yourself and you have a digital representation of you, and you keep the two things in a virtuous circle by interacting with one another so that you improve one and by that you improve the other. You're then in charge of your own data in this model, and we could discuss that later, not a hospital or some tech company that takes all the data in and then is at risk of massive security breaches or using data without your permission. You hold your own data and you do what you wish to do with it. So that's the direction of travel. Coming to a conclusion here, what we're looking at ultimately is the idea of healthcasts, the equivalent of weather forecasts. We can use these things by the equivalent of weather and climate, which is short-term treatment of patients when they need to be fixed up, versus keeping them on a trajectory of wellness as far as possible, which is the analog of doing climate prediction. So these are the aspirations here. Remember, the talk is the future of medicine. I'm not saying that a lot of this has happened yet, but this is the direction in which it must go. It'll be made more scientific and personalized as a result. The ethical questions that crop up here, I've alluded to, and people may want to ask or talk about them around data, ownership, limitations of models, what's it all going to cost, how affordable is it, and so on and so forth. These are important questions that people as individuals need to be aware of as this technology takes root. So last of all, I just want to unashamedly make a plug, as Kononika said kindly, for the book that we published in 2023. This one with my colleague Roger Highfield gives you all the details you want to know in a very readable way, and much more than I've been able to talk about today, about how virtual you, as it were, and the digital twin are being developed. And with that, I want to stop and thank you very much for your attention. We can run that second video. Are you ready to do it? Yep. Because you've been very good and quiet, we're going to run you a short, very short video, which is called The Next Pandemic.
Next week.
Over the past decades, viruses spread by animals have caused severe diseases in people. That was the story of SARS, MERS, and now COVID-19. As the global population surges in coming decades to almost 10 billion people, changes in land use will prime the planet for future spillovers of infections. The question is not if there will be future pandemics, but when. And most importantly, will we be ready? We just might. There is a new weapon in the fight against global diseases, the supercomputer. During the global COVID-19 pandemic, we used them to simulate almost everything. From the microscopic world of the virus to the many possible ways to treat the infection. Understand how the virus spreads, or predict the future course of the pandemic. Using supercomputers, we can look at the spread of the virus as it travels through the air from one person to another, and study the effectiveness of masks, air conditioning, and social distancing. Or move down to the microscopic level and simulate the virus in amazing detail, to understand how it pirates our cells to reproduce. This coronavirus uses spikes to latch on to human cells, coating them with compounds called glycan chains to make them invisible to our immune system. Computer simulations have revealed chinks in this armor, small regions free of glycans that are vulnerable to human antibodies. Enzymes like this one help coronaviruses infect our cells. Scientists can simulate in a matter of hours how this and other targets respond to hundreds of drug candidates to find new antiviral drugs, which may work for new variants, even novel human coronaviruses. But a promising treatment can sometimes come at a high cost. Because viruses borrow our biochemistry to multiply, they are hard to combat without also damaging infected cells. The drugs employed to treat the disease can occasionally cause life-threatening side effects, such as disturbances to the rhythm of the heart. Luckily for us, simulations of human cells, tissues, and organs are becoming ever more sophisticated, allowing doctors to explore the effects of an infection on the entire body. We are entering the era of exascale computers, machines 1,000 times faster than the previous generation, more Powerful machines combined with new knowledge, artificial intelligence, and smarter software will help us understand and fight these silent enemies. When the next pandemic comes along, and it will, the virtual human will be ready to simulate the virus and its effects and devise solutions to the pandemic at pandemic speed.
We would like to express a heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest speaker for sharing their invaluable insights and expertise with us today. As a token of appreciation and respect, we would now like to present a memento to our guests, symbolizing our gratitude for their time, effort, and contribution. Amity Noida thanks you once again for gracing us with your presence. May I request Professor Dr. Manoj Kumar Pandey sir and Professor Dr. Madhuri Kumari ma'am to kindly step forward to present the memento.
Now the forum is open for questions. We invite the audience to interact and gain further insights from Dr. Coveney.
We'll take few questions, maybe 3, 4 questions before we conclude this session. Yeah, we can take your question, please.
Rafin sir, I'm a second year student of BTech AI. And last summer, I had a project on AI in public health and people physics. So the thing is, you said that AI has limitation. For example, the AI gives you an output, and we are not able to explain it to the scientists that how it came to that. For that, we have AI scientists for explaining how it works. But sometimes mathematics of the life we ourselves don't understand. So how would you make it easy? Because we are not in medical field. We are working in AI. So how would we know what the AI is actually capturing on? And then how will we explain to the scientists?
I think you're saying the same thing as I am. There are lots of drawbacks to AI, as well as apparently a lot of power. The power actually resides typically with methods, most of the common ones we call parametric or neural network based models. You have to ask in the same way as I do in a physics based model, how many parameters are in the model? You may remember I was talking about parameters continuously, for example, in Neil Ferguson's model, in the heart model, and other things. The first question you ask is how many parameters are in the model. Once you know that, you can use uncertainty quantification to figure out which ones are most dominant. As in the COVID model of Ferguson, we worked out in the end 20, and about three of them accounted for 65% of the uncertainty. Do you see? So we've shrunk the model down. If you start with an AI model, and I could give you many examples, one of them for the reinvent code, which is an adaptive, generative, active learning form of AI, its neural network has 5 million parameters in it. AlphaFold from DeepMind and Google has nearly 1 billion parameters, and a large language model has 1 trillion. So these are colossal numbers of parameters, and those parameters are just connection weights in the neural network, linking one neuron to another. So actually, it means that we don't know how to control the uncertainties in these things because they're far too big. That the connection weights have no physical meaning, they're just tuning parameters to get a fit. And if you have that number of parameters, you're always going to fit something, whatever it is. That's why they work. The limitation is then when I bring up new data that's outside where it was trained on, will it be reliably predicted? And that speaks to things like what happens to the prediction when I change the individual parameters. And typically, even you train a neural network multiple times, talking about reproducibility, you get totally different connection weights. So the problems are completely opaque. We understand how they work, but we don't understand how they connect to the uncertainty and prediction for a new case. And ultimately, that's what we must be confident about. I bring a new situation up which hasn't been seen. How can I believe the prediction? And that is surprising as it may seem to you, not properly understood because of the complexity of the system. And that's the weakness. The strength is because I've got so many parameters, I can fit anything if you give me a set, however complicated it is. If it's a closed set, I will be able to fit it. Does that help?
Okay.
Any other question?
We can take one more question. I think there should be some question that comes in.
Good afternoon, sir. So we have a question like many of the students are working on AI related projects in healthcare. So the biggest challenge that we face is like let's say if we want to go for the development of a digital twin project, the challenge is availability of the tool as well as the real-time data set. So which tool do you think would be the best to start with?
Do you mean AI tool?
Yes, so for the digital twin implementation
Right.
specifically.
So it's very difficult to make a general statement here. In biology and medicine, each of these scenarios we were talking about, disease cases, has different kinds of problems that we're addressing. And I touched on that a little bit. If I'm doing drug discovery, and that could be personalized drug discovery, the challenge is to be able to search the space of possible compounds that may bind into a protein. And that's where these generative methods are very powerful because they can spew out or create totally new structures that haven't been made before, but you can find in a computer, as we do, look very powerful. So that's a methodology there. Do you see? But it's going to be different for different cases. Where we talk about a drug with docking, the first thing people do when they're looking for a new drug, they do a very cheap and cheerful calculation, which is to look at the shape of the molecule, how it fits into an active site. No physics to speak of, really, but it's very fast. And if you do that, that's a kind of problem which you can train effectively with some pretty straightforward sort of neural network topologies that then make this docking calculation incredibly fast, because it's almost like a lookup table. There's no calculation to be done at all. So I can go through multiple cases where I'll have a different neural network that I need to work on. Imaging, has its own types of neural networks involved that people prefer. So I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to this. But the concern I have, and I hope you got my message, is I'm trying to deal with an individual patient, not the average. And how am I going to get that out of a large data set on many people? How can I expect that a thing that applies to the population is going to apply to the individual? Cancer, particular forms of cancer are like rare diseases. Each patient can't be treated in the same way as somebody else. So you can't use previous examples as a guide to what to do in those cases. You need more information about the mechanism of what's going on, why that patient is different. So it's a tension. I'm not trying to say I don't believe in AI. I think it's got a lot of power, but it needs to be kind of brought into play when we're working with mechanistic methods, and it can accelerate a lot of the calculations you could have to do, which are expensive on large computers.
Okay, I think it's time for, okay, one last question. Yeah, sure.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, I am thinking of working on a research in artificial intelligence and psychology. So, could you please give your insights on it? Something related to neural link.
Psychology.
It's not very easy to hear. There's a lot of noise in that. What is it?
AI
In-
for psychology.
Yes.
Yeah. So
AI and psychology.
mental health.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the question of mental health, can we treat it? Is that perhaps the bigger picture here? It's like everything I was talking about, we are underpinning it with understanding. Science is about understanding. So medicine is often, do you remember I suggested not really a science, because it's just using hearsay and experience, and that experience depends on the individual, which doesn't make it objective. So, but if you're trying to do with the brain, which is the heart of the seat of these psychological issues and consciousness and other things, that's one of the weakest areas of application. At this moment, we do things I talked about, strokes, there are aneurysms and arteriovenous malformations, things like that. These are physical deviations or pathologies in the arteries and veins that lead to stroke and other things. That's very physical. We can deal with that. When you talk about psychological diseases and other things, it has to be said that's on far less firm foundations at the moment. So we don't have models that are very reliable in general, never mind for patient-specific cases. But you can try to build an AI model. That's sometimes where it's useful. If we don't understand enough about what's going on, we still try to make an input-output correlation. If you have something you're doing psychologically, something measurable, which is psychological, and you look at what input parameters you need that you think are relevant to between cause and effect, that's something where I think AI machine learning could play a role in trying to uncover those initial correlations.
So we can expect a definitive remedy to psychological issues through AI.
You can expect a definitive
Definitive remedy.
remedy.
Well, no, at the moment I'm saying we have to tread very carefully with those kind of, medical issues. It would be foolhardy for me to claim that we're going to be attacking those problems with these methods in the near future. There are people working on models for this stuff, but it's relative to, say, modeling the heart. It's at an incredibly basic level now. But the agenda doesn't change. I mean, if we're trying to build a virtual human, ultimately we need to put everything in it. And we building it piece by piece. And when we develop new connections that are working, we link them into the model. We don't throw everything out and build again from scratch. So we're gradually going to build better and better representations of the human body. This stuff will come into play as our understanding improves.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, everyone. I think it's very interesting topic to be discussed and to be understood, because it is so futuristic that even the topic entails a lot of uncertainty, and how exactly we have to take it forward brings in lot of research, innovation, discussions. So with that, I would like to take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks for this international guest lecture. On behalf of Amity University, I would like to thank our founder president, sir, who is a futuristic visionary who always pushes us beyond our boundary. Our honorable chancellor, sir, who always wants our students to go beyond the comfort level and understand what is there in for the future and be very ready for it. our respected Vice Chancellor ma'am, who always guides us to take our students to a level where they can be very, very ready to take up whatever challenges come now and forever. I would also like to thank our HOI sir, who is always so supportive to bring such lectures up front. Whenever we design, he is always there to execute it and put it across to the students. HODs, of course, are the source which brings it into the implementation ground. And our thanks to all the HODs who had put this forward, the lecture forward to the students so that students could form the part of it. Our faculty colleagues who are here to witness the lecture. Our MC who are part of our volunteers, all our student volunteers. Now, the most important part, on behalf of Amity University, we extend a warm thanks to Professor Kovini. It was very, very short notice when I and Dr. Koneneka discussed, and we thought we cannot just miss this opportunity, who is the pioneer in this subject and coming here in Delhi can spare some time, then why not we just go beyond and bring him to our campus so that he can physically be there to tell our students what's there in store for you in the future. So exciting with trillions of opportunities that you can think of. It is, of course, the modalities and the insight that he has provided completely tells us that we cannot be in silo. We have to go beyond. AI has the power. Medical is the application that he talked about, but he talked also about digital U to digital earth, which means there is lot of areas where we can think about this virtual digitization, bringing in the real time problem and bridging a lot of gaps of our understanding. So thank you so much for being here. Very, very important. Our thanks goes to OHSL, who had made this lecture happen. Mr. Anil Srivastav, Dr. Konenika, and Mr. Jeevan, we thank you for helping us out with such an insightful lecture. All thanks goes to the media department, the IT department, the admin department, who all are at the backstage and making this happen. Last but not the least, I would like to thank my team, Team CRC, who has been there to support and without whom this event would not have been successful. Thank you, everyone. Above all, can we have a round of applause for the speaker and for yourself, all the participants, for sitting with us and being there for this lecture. Thank you once again.